Hello, dear listeners. If you're new here, we're Margin Mavens, and we are obsessed with writing in our books and sharing our thoughts with you guys. In this episode, we are talking about Shadow Kiss by Rochelle Mead as part of our throwback miniseries. It is the third book in the Vampire Academy series. Last book, we watch Rose have to escape and fend off bloodthirsty Strigoi and lose one of her best friends, Mason Ashford, in the process. In Shadow Kiss, Rose is being haunted, not only by Mason, but by other ghosts, and their appearance is causing quite a stir for her. As usual, this video will contain spoilers, so please keep that in mind before listening. Now, Kayla, as this was your first time reading Shadow Kiss, walk me through it. What were you feeling?
What I first want to highlight real quick is we're recording this on the same day that we recorded Vampires of El Norte. Okay? Which, if you all, dear listeners, remember, I proclaimed as my favorite book of 2024.
Oh
Okay?
no.
Shadow Kiss is my least favorite book of 2024. I struggled so hard to finish this book, okay? Between the teenage angst, right? The inappropriate relationship, the constant lies and secrets and miscommunication. I wanted to rip this book up into tiny itty bitty pieces and shove it down Rochelle Mead's throat because I just could not handle it anymore. Lisa was not a good friend. Rose was not a good friend. Lisa was the worst, hands down. Just completely selfish, completely like, if it did not involve her and Christian, she was not at all paying attention to it. And Rose is over here struggling, dealing with the fact, not only is she dealing with the guilt of feeling responsible for Mason's death because she's the one who told Mason where the Strigoi were. But she's also dealing with guilt at the fact that, like, he really loved her and she did not reciprocate his feelings as strongly. So, like, and he went back for her. And if he hadn't, he'd probably be alive. And then her whole gross, icky thoughts and feelings about Dimitri, which gagged me. Truly, truly gagged me. Look, listeners, I understand that Rose and Dimitri are endgame. Like, I know how this works. I read enough YA to know how this works, right? Like, I know. But boy, howdy. So, for some further context clues into the rest of this book, Rose is currently dealing with, seeing ghosts, seeing Mason, all of that. She's talking to a therapist. She's still training with Dimitri. But she gets her marks because she killed some Strigoi. There's other stuff going on. Just like Lisa being Lisa, the queen, Tatiana, whatever. And like, there comes a point where Rose realizes that the reason Mason keeps showing up is that he's trying to warn her about something. And he's trying to warn her that the
Wards.
that the wards are failing. Yes, thank you. And by the time she figures it out, and by that I mean by the time she pulls her head out of her ass long enough to figure it out, is when the Strigoi are basically on campus, right? But of course, she's got to be, the hero and go and put herself and others at risk because she's got to get Christian because Lisa, where's Christian? And blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, instead of just going to safety, Lisa and Rose and Christian need to be badasses and take down as many Strigoi as possible and blah, 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 and da-da-da, and da-da-da. And then, of course, at some point, I don't even think I have my timeline right because I probably trauma blocked it, but Rose and Dimitri sleep together, and not in the innocent sleeping together way, in the they took off their clothes and had sex way, which is really gross because he's still 24 and she's not yet 18. So that immediately, like, I think I gave this book 2 stars. And I think honestly that was very, very gracious of me. But you find out at the end, Dimitri is unable to escape the Strigoi, and he is turned into one. And that is basically where the book ends. Well, actually, no, that's a lie. The book ends with Rose deciding that she's going to drop out of school and go find Dimitri, who is now a Strigoi, because she knows that he would hate to be a Strigoi, so she has to be the one to kill him. And then you get the most painful scene, and I don't mean painful and emotional, I mean painful as in mental torture, of Lisa essentially pitching a fit because how dare Rose do something that does not involve her or does not involve protecting her? And how dare she go and do this thing when it's far more important that she be on campus at St. Vladimir's protecting Lisa? And it was just like, kudos to Rose for sticking to her guns and basically being like, no, I'm doing this because I fully expected her to just sort of fall over and show her belly, because God forbid this girl have any sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Have any sort of agency in her own life where it's not being decided for her. But yeah, I hated this book. I hated it. I hated it. I hated all of it. It was gross. It was disgusting. A 24-year-old and a 17-year-old have no business having sex together. They have no business being in a relationship together. None of that. It just uh, between that and Lisa, I just was like, I can't with this book anymore. I can't with this book anymore. But I imagine if I was a teenager reading this, I would have been all sorts of happy about Rose and Dimitri confessing their feelings for one another and all of that. But the age difference is just too much. Too much for me. Hands down the most painful book I've ever read. It was torturous. But I've committed to finishing the series because I can't start something and then not finish it.
Tell us how you really feel.
I mean,
okay. I think, as having read it when I was a teenager, this series is always going to have that nostalgia factor for me. I've just kind of come to the point where I recognize the taboo, not great parts, and I think I also recognize why those parts are necessary for the theme and the plot line of the entire series. Because if we didn't have that relationship between Dimitri and Rose, it would have mattered to Rose if Dimitri was turned into a Strigoi, because that would have been her teacher. But without that extra element of being in love with each other, having just shared that thing, it makes it to where the scene with her finding out that he's been taken and all of that is, that much more heartbreaking. And I remember reading this one when it was like first published and not knowing what was going to happen, and it really had me stressed. I think the foreshadowing in this book is really good, because you kind of see there's a point where Rose and Dimitri are fighting each other because Dimitri is pretending to be a Strigoi on campus because they're having these like training sessions where the Guardians are basically jumping the Dampier students at random points when they're supposed to be protecting their Moroi, right? And basically testing to see where their skills are, what they've learned in their time at the school. And so at one point, Rose ends up fighting Dimitri, and she actually ends up winning, which I think is a cool foreshadowing towards the next book that we will not be talking about today, despite the fact that both of us by this point have read it and have feelings. So that was really interesting. We got a lot more Eddie in this book, which was nice because Eddie was one of the kids.
No, it wasn't. It was a warning. It was a warning, like in every good anime.
Why?
Doesn't Eddie die at the end? No, I'm pretty sure he does.
He does not. I guarantee you.
Preview. My book.
I could spoil something, but I will not. I can just promise you that Eddie is not dead. He is taken. I know where you're going. He is taken. So, so
he's
Eddie,
taken,
and
and
then
then they
out.
rescue him.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I blocked out this book when I finished it.
And so Eddie Castillo was one of the students that were with Mason and Mia and Christian and everything, and Rose when fending off these or going into this Strigoi thing in Spokane. And Eddie has a really rough time there because not only is there and captured by the Strigoi, but he is basically used as a blood bag. And so a lot of his time during there is very foggy for him. He ended up having to deal with the aftermath of the kind of endorphins and the chemical reaction to the bite and all of these things. And that's really, sucky in all terms of the word. So we get a lot more Eddie in this book where he has kind of become this like older brother role for Rose because he was best friends with Mason and his whole thing is like, oh, Rose was his girlfriend. Like, I need to watch out for her. And Rose is kind of like, I'm okay with it because it seems like it's something that he needs to do in order for him to feel good, but also he's not like a bad guy. Like, he's not annoying me by being around. And because of their shared experience, he's probably the only other Dampier that Rose would be comfortable protecting Lisa because at least Rose knows, like, he knows the actual danger out there. So he's not, somebody that's just like, oh, this is just an assignment, And I think because I was able to kind of compartmentalize and say, like, okay, this is a taboo plot point in the book series. This book series probably wouldn't have had I don't know. I would like to say that it wouldn't have had the same plot point in 2024, but these kind of age gaps and these kind of plot points still exist. But I don't know if it would have been something I would have picked up in 2024. But as a reread, I kind of just end up compartmentalizing and also just knowing that it's necessary for the plot points of the later books. Like Dimitri and Rose's relationship is not a giant focal point in terms of like the series, but it is one of the major selling points of what was garnering teenage attention then was, oh, the mysterious teacher and stuff like that. And so viewing it from that standpoint of I don't agree with the age gap, but I can also in my head I think I got to a point where I just started viewing Rose as older because she is constantly painted as like so much different than like her other classmates, especially because of what the decisions she's making and the situation she ends up in. Not just like putting away Dimitri for a second. Let's stack him on a shelf and just kind of keep him over there for a second.
Forever.
I love Dimitri as a character. I think he's really interesting. I think what Rochelle does with him is really interesting. But taking away his relationship with Rose for a second, she is constantly painted as I think what Rochelle does really well is that she doesn't try to make it seem as though like Rose is never like, oh, I'm so different from the other people my age. Like it's never something that Rose is, I think, like talking about of like, oh, like I'm, you know, mentally older than where I am or whatever. Like I think those lines make it really cheesy. Instead of telling us that, they really show it to us in how Rose handles conflict, right? She's grown so much from that first book of 100% a lot of the things that would have happened in Shadowkiss, Rose of Vampire Academy, Rose of the first book would have just like punched and then asked questions later, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so dealing with these ghost situations, because Rose is dealing with a lot in this book. Not only is she dealing with the aftermath of Mason, but the ghosts are not just random ghosts to her. These are ghosts of Mason. These are ghosts of Lisa's family. These are ghosts of, you know, the children that she and Dimitri saw slaughtered at these attacks. Like these are ghosts that are people that she recognizes and then
Mm-hmm.
adds that extra element. And so to have her start going to therapy and everyone being like, oh, she's dealing with PTSD, but they're not taking into consideration her bond with Lisa, you know, which as like I'm not saying that any of my students are like Shadow Kiss and have these like extra bonds or whatever, but that would have been like the first thing that crossed my mind of like, we have like in bold in your student folder, it says that you have a like magical bond with this other student
Right.
and that, you know, you're dealing with this element of spirit that was not something that is like widely known. Let's
Right.
look into that some more before just assuming that you're dealing with like a mental breakdown situation. And so that was incredibly frustrating. Um, because I think a lot of the issues would have been able to be dealt with a lot sooner if like more people were asking that aspect of things. And I think that's why Dimitri and Rose make a lot of sense without, once again, compartmentalizing the age gap. Because I think their relationship as a romance is a really compelling one. And I think would have I don't like them because of the age gap. I like them because of everything else. And the age gap is just a really unfortunate plot decision
Mm-hmm.
that I have to like sweep aside because this is a reread for me. Um, but the fact that he's kind of the only one that is like, hey, because of this other stuff, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't understand these things, but I'm willing to hear you out farther than just like Rose is having a mental breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of get more information about his upbringing. We find out that his grandmother has some sort of like vision thing. They get tarot cards read at one point, and Lisa's is very telling that she's going to be somebody important in the society, which we kind of knew. It's like very common sense of like, yeah, she's the last Dragomir. No matter what she does, she's going to be important in their society. Rose is a really annoying tell us her cards tell her a really annoying thing of just like you're gonna protect, you know. And she's like, yeah, that's like my shtick, you know. You could have just left it there. And
Right.
I also would have been very frustrated if I was in Rosa's shoes of like I'm dealing with all of these things and what you're gonna tell me is the one thing that I know. And then Dimitri's uh prediction, right? Dimitri's cards basically tell him he's going to lose what he values most, right? And so he immediately, and I think us as the readers are like, oh, that means Rose. And so we automatically are like on high alert, like, is something going to happen to Rose and all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody who was not only rereading it, but rereading it very quickly because I
Mm-hmm.
was just trying to get through and kind of catch up with our schedule and stuff, a lot of the foreshadowing was a lot more evident than I think it would have been if I like had slowed down and was just kind of there for like plot points. And so Rose is dealing with this thing. Dimitri is kind of the only one that's trying to figure out what's going on with her. There's also Adrian, who is really good insight into the spirit thing because since he's able to see the auras, he's able to understand like, oh, when Lisa gets really upset or Lisa loses her mind a little bit, you take that from Lisa. And that is why you're feeling all of these bouts of like anger and impulsivity because you're taking it from her.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts making sense because that's kind of why Lisa's able to handle her spirit abilities and she's able to handle being off her meds and all of these things is because Rose is getting the downfall.
Mm-hmm.
And Um, so Adrian kind of ends up being there. Adrian's a really fun character for me because he still has that age gap. He's still 21. You know, he is still somebody that shouldn't be hanging out with a bunch of high schoolers. And yet, without him, we as the reader and we as, you know, the audience wouldn't get a lot of understanding towards that bond between Lisa and Rose because he's
Mm-hmm.
the first one to able to like visually tell us what's going on, which
Mm-hmm.
is really important. I will agree though that Lisa really sucks in this book, and the next book she doesn't get a lot better. She has
No.
some growth towards the end, but it's not enough for me to be like, this is cool. We work through it. Um but Lisa is very wrapped up in Christian, right? It's a problem when Christian Ozera, who him and Rose kind of butt heads, but they've come to a nice understanding by the end of this book because obviously they fight the Strigoi together, which I can understand your annoyance at the fact that they did not go to safety, right? But I think for their characters, it makes a lot of sense why they wouldn't, because Rose obviously is headstrong and does not want anybody else to get hurt. And then Christian is very like, I was helpless when my parents did this thing, and I was helpless when they came to kill me. I will never be helpless again. And he's very
Mm-hmm.
big on, I will prove that I'm not going to be a Strigoi. So if that means that I'm risking my life to, you know, fight these people, then that's kind of all things. Um, so yeah, so the Rose and Dimitri Rose ends up having a very big meltdown, right? Because um a secret society has been formed at St. Vladimir's Academy known as Mana, I think. I don't remember if
Mm-hmm.
there was a little accent mark on it, but it's basically the Royal Moroi are meeting up and being like, wow, we're so much cooler than the unroyal Moroi. We are the reason that, you know, our society is so good and great. But they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to prove that they can use their magic to defend themselves. But it's
Yeah.
kind of just like a uh, show pony situation. Like they don't have actual interest in using their magic to defend themselves. They're kind of just
Right.
trying to prove that they can be better than the other people. And so
Right.
they're practicing their magic, and that kind of causes the wards to start failing because they're using all of their magic near the boundaries. And so these wards, they're being replaced every 2 weeks, but these people are coming in almost every night and they're having some sort of, you know, ceremony or ritual or something is happening and these wards are failing. And Lisa ends up going because she's trying to figure out what information they have about her and Christian in terms of the queen, because Queen
Mm-hmm.
Tatiana is being a thorn in everybody's side, right? Because she
Mm-hmm.
kind of being the queen, right, is sticking her nose in places that, like, I just feel like a queen has bigger things to worry about, you
Right.
know? And so she doesn't want Lisa with Christian. She also doesn't want Lisa to keep spouting her new age propaganda, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she's like, I'm going to keep Lisa under my thumb. Lisa's going to end up with Adrian. I need Adrian to stop being with Rose, even though he's not with Rose, but I'm getting all of my gossip from secondhand sources.
Mm-hmm.
And so she kind of like steps in places she shouldn't. And so Lisa goes and decides she's going to go to one of these meetings, and she ends up getting like beat up because they're trying to tell her to like compulse people to not fight her.
Mm-hmm.
And she's struggling with it because she's getting punched in the face. And so Rose shows up as per usual, and she ends up kind of taking all of Lisa's anger and everything. And she kind of like beats the crap out of I don't know if it was Jesse or Ralph or
Yeah,
one of
probably.
them, but
Both.
one of the boys. She ends up beating the crap out of one of the boys. Gets taken away by Dimitri. They end up at a cabin. That is when they sleep together. Um this happens. It's a very obviously pivotal thing, but it also once again makes sense for kind of the arc that the series is going through. If they wouldn't have had this like moment where things kind of came to that catalyst moment, Dimitri finally had like, oh, you know, you're going to be 18 soon. Like, we'll won't be able to be together while you're my student, but there's a future for us and yada, yada, yada. If they wouldn't have had that conversation, then the subsequent attack wouldn't have hurt people as much, I guess. And
Mhm.
so they're leaving the cabin. She sees Mason and he seems really distraught, right? One of the things that really stuck out and broke my heart about this book was that Mason was unable to get his peace because he died trying to kill Strigoi, protect people that he
Mhm.
loves. And then he's not able to get his peace because he still feels as though he has to help fight Strigoi, protect the person he loves. You know, he finds his peace knowing that the girl he loves is safe, you know, like
Mhm.
there's no longer an immediate threat. And it was really heartbreaking to me because not only was he not able to get that peace until they dealt with everything, but he was also kind of like forced to see the reason why they didn't work when he was alive. And so it was a lot of
Mhm.
like realization and learning of, oh, we weren't going to work because she was actually in love with this guy.
Mhm.
Um, and that obviously had to have sucked because I don't think he necessarily regretted his decisions, you know, because he still
No.
loved her, but it was one of
Right.
those like, oh crap, I did all of these things for a woman that like didn't feel the same way.
Yep.
Um, which was really sad. And so he ends up warning them like, hey, like they're coming. And Dimitri is that bona fide like badass that he's supposed to be throughout this entire series. He fights off a lot of them at the same time, tells Rose to go. A big attack happens. Rose and Christian end up killing the Mostergoy because he ends up using his fire and she ends up staking them. All of these things. And then Eddie ends up kidnapped with a bunch of them. And what kind of ends up becoming protocol is, you know, once people are taken, once that immediate Strigoi threat is taken care of, they're not our problem anymore. The issue with the way that the Moroi Society deals with these Strigoi is they never actively try to like hunt them down. They're
Right.
always on the defense. They're never on the offense. And so Rose has a problem with that because she's like, there's no way we're gonna be cool with like Eddie. You know, I'm almost certain that if it wasn't anybody she knew,
Mhm.
I don't think she would have had that same gut feeling of like I need to do something about it. But because it was Eddie, because she didn't want to like fail another one of her friends, she was like, we need to go
Mhm.
and help these people. And her mom is kind of cool because her mom kind of leads the charge of, I think we should bring some magic users with us because that obviously helped gain us an edge. And so we find out that the Strigoi are using a cave that's only like 5 miles away from the school, right? Which, like, I want to know what adult messed up to not think that that was a possibility. You know, those caves didn't just like spring up overnight. And so the fact that they were just the entire time like, oh, because of our wards, we don't have to worry about those things. I'm like, as an adult, especially one that has to deal with like risk assessment for school constantly,
Mhm.
I would be like, no, 100%, we have our wards. That's cool. Right. But we also need to be checking that perimeter because
Right.
things can happen. Kids might sneak off campus. Like
Right.
things happen. And the fact that, like, within 5 miles, you're not making sure that there's nowhere that Strigoi can be hiding just feels like an oversight that shouldn't have happened. And so they go into this cave. They're once again badass. They get the people out. There's some casualties, as is all of these fights, because the Strigoi are still Strigoi. And, you know, these guardians and everything, no matter how good or not infallible.
Mhm.
And Dimitri is surprised. I think it's really heartbreaking. The reason he's surprised, because it's very much implied, he's surprised because he was making eye contact with Rose.
Mhm.
Like they had gone out of that fight, he's making eye contact with Rose. They had that silent promise of like things are going to be different now. We're not going to,
Mhm.
at least from each other, hide our feelings, but we're not, you know, we can work towards our future now. And that
Mhm.
1 second of being distracted basically costs him everything because he ends up being attacked. She is dragged out by Stan, which is one of the teachers we get introduced to all the way in the beginning. He's kind of one of the harder ones on her, but we see it from a point of view of, I know you can be the best, so I'm harder on you. But as a teacher, this is like a BS mentality. You should not be harder on the students because you know they can handle it, you know, because
Right.
That's a lot
not
of pressure to put on
Yeah, it
anybody.
is. Truly.
And so he ends up basically dragging Rose out, and Rose is kind of dealing with that aftermath of Dimitri was in there, Dimitri is not safe. And then we find out that his body was not one of the ones that was recovered. And she kind of just has a gut feeling. And so Mason comes to her when she calls, and she's like, "Okay, you look like you're getting ready to like dip out. You look like you've made your peace. That's cool." Asks him about Dimitri, and that is when she finds out that he is a Strigoi. And getting away from that for a second, Mason's last moments being reminiscent of when he was alive and having that like mischievous air to him made me so sad again, right?
Yeah.
Mason is one of those character deaths that I understand
Yeah.
the reason behind it, but it's very like Finnick Odair coded
Hate it.
in that it really hurts. And it's just close enough to the main characters that you kind of get nervous because if the author's willing to do that kind of thing. And that's kind of the whole point behind it. And so Mason ends up finding his peace. Rose and Lisa have that conversation of Rose being like, I need to leave for this thing. Lisa finally has the realization that Rose and Dimitri were in love, right? Which is one of the reasons that Lisa's kind of the worst.
Yeah.
Because, and granted, in Lisa's defense, she doesn't have the same ability that Rose does of picking up on any, give me a second.
You finished? I didn't interrupt yet.
And she doesn't have that same like ability. Like Rose can pick up on things that Lisa's feeling without being in that area, you know, which is obviously an unfair advantage, right? But Lisa and Rose are meant to be best friends. They have known each other for like a decade, like all of these things, right? There is no possible way, speaking as a former teenage girl, right? There is no possible way that my best friend would be able to be in love and have all of these like giant feelings for somebody for like more than a year. And I would not notice.
Correct.
You know, like,
Correct.
especially the amount of times that Lisa sees both of them interacting. Even if, like, okay, if my best friend was getting tutoring, right? Because obviously my best friend's not trying to fight people. If my best friend in high school was trying to get tutoring and she was consistently getting after school tutoring from this one teacher for like a year, right? And then I start seeing them being very familiar with each other, immediately my ass would be like, hey, what are you doing? You know, so the fact that Lisa doesn't ever pick up on that is crazy.
It shows how self-absorbed she is.
Yeah.
It truly does. Because
Yeah.
how do you not figure this out?
Like Adrian, it took him like 3 seconds.
I was gonna say 2 seconds, if that.
Yeah, you
If
know,
that.
we meet Adrian in Frostbite. He starts flirting with Rose. She makes a joke and says, "Aren't you a little old?" He sees one interaction between Dimitri and Rose and is like, "Oh, I'm not old enough."
Enough.
You know, and all of these things, but Lisa has been like with them. And it's not like they're subtle, you know? Like the fact that nobody picks it up is crazy.
It's infuriating. It is infuriating.
Especially as like the other adults. You know, like that's kind of crazy. And so Rose has that conversation with Lisa, says, I need to go. You know, if it's the foreshadowing once again of, I think the conversation happens in Vampire Academy or early Frostbite, where Rose and Dimitri are talking and they're talking about what would happen if they became Strigoi. And he's like, I believe that,
I think it's Frost.
Yeah, he's like, I believe that if that happened, I would want somebody to kill me. And so that's kind of like with her, she sticks with it. So obviously when she finds out he's a Strigoi, it makes sense why she decides she needs to go and be the one to end him. because we
Mhm.
get all of that foreshadowing of like he's training her one-on-one. So away from just their relationship and her feeling of obligation there, he is also like she's probably the only one that could
Mhm.
because of that one-on-one training. You know, it's that like
Right.
I've been training to kill Strigoi, right? Never
Right.
knowing that the one I'd be trying to kill was you and all of these things. And so away from her relationship, it makes sense that why she would be the one that felt like she needed to do it. She'd also be the only one that like not that they wouldn't care, but that would feel as though it was necessary. I think a lot of the older guardians have been like desensitized to like sometimes they just end up becoming Strigoi.
Right. Because
And
they've
if
seen it before.
and yeah, so like sometimes that just happens. And if we run into them again, I'll kill them, but I'm not gonna go out of my way to do it.
Right.
And so that ends up bringing us into Blood Promise,
Oh,
which we
hold on.
will.
Hold on. Hold on. You
Have,
forgot Rose using Adrian's feelings for her
mm-hmm.
to get money
Yeah.
so that she could fund this little journey under the condition
Yep.
that when she comes back, and
Mm-hmm.
in Rose's mind, it's if, not when she comes back, she's going to give Adrian a fair shot.
Well, that's the thing. Not to argue with you because I love you so much, but she 100% does not believe she's coming back.
No. Yeah, that's why it's if in
Yeah.
her brain.
Oh, because you
If
said
she
when.
comes back.
Yeah.
No, yeah, but Adrian's saying when.
Yeah.
When she comes back.
Yeah. And
That's
she's like,
Adrian's condition.
I'm
But
not.
in Rose's head, it's
Yeah.
if. So
Yeah.
she knows full damn well that
Yeah.
she's probably not holding up her end of the deal. But she's going to use the feelings that this man has for her
Yeah.
for money so she can go and kill Dimitri.
Yep. And like I said, Adrian's one of those characters that I have a lot of love for Adrian.
Just a broken little baby.
Yeah. But, right, with Adrian, I think it's important, my lovely Kayla, that if we're going to spend the first 8 minutes yelling about
Yeah.
the unhealthy and icky relationship between
Yeah.
Rose and Dimitri, we got to give Adrian
Mhm.
the same energy, which is why I compartmentalized both.
Here's why I disagree a little bit.
Okay.
Like 4 years, and especially since Adrian comes across a lot younger
Mm-hmm.
than his actual age because of his spirit use and like his rampant alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's some research out there that indicates that when a person starts abusing like drugs, alcohol, things of that nature, when that starts, that's mentally where they're stuck at. So like mentally, I feel like, and that's probably part of the reason why he likes to hang out with Lisa and Rose, because he's still mentally in high school. But Dimitri's like the complete opposite of him.
I guess, and I understand. I compartmentalize both because I know that the age gaps are just kind of one of the draws to this series and how it got the audience it got kind of thing. So I have to compartmentalize both, right? But I think if we're talking about which one I would rather a loved one be interested in, it's not going to be the rampant alcoholic.
Oh, but like, I think part of my issue with
I'm not an
Dimitri is
Adrian apologist.
yes, you have. Because Adrian's honest about who and what he is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, he's like, I'm a degenerate. Okay? I'm a degenerate. You're cute. Let's go out. Right? Like, he's never not upfront
But
about
it's
who
the
he
same
is.
thing of if Dimitri was upfront about it.
But no, here's the thing. Dimitri comes across, right, very much like he's this knowledgeable person in this particular subject. Like, he knows how to protect Mavroy, he knows how to fight and kill Strigoi. Like, he is very much the quote-unquote expert. And, like, he's responsible, he's mature, and he knows what's expected of him, and, like, you know, and it's very much like you can't sit there and be the knowledgeable one and be the expert and be the best of the best and then just at least not pump the brakes until she's 18. Like,
but I think that's what makes it interesting is the fact that everybody, including the audience, puts Dimitri on this like pedestal, right? But he repeatedly throughout the series says like, I am not infallible. I am not like this all-knowing person, because Rose calls him out on it repeatedly. And I think it's
but she's calling him out because she wants to sleep with him.
Yes.
But she's calling it out not because she's right.
But there's also points where she's calling him out because of the fact that, like, when she's having the ghost issues, right? He is trying to take that like smart and rational approach, and she was like, "No, I need you to be open-minded. I need you to be willing to listen and all of these things," right? Mm-hmm. Adrian and Dimitri are just two different sides of the same coin. But because Dimitri is the one that's older, we're putting that expectation on him to still have this boundary, right? Which is a boundary he should have. I am not arguing that he should not have this boundary, right? But the energy has to be the same between the two, because both of them in their own way have issues and upbringing that have led to where they're at now. Adrian has leaned into his alcohol and his drugs because of his spirit use, which makes him seem younger, right? Dimitri has leaned into this need to be perfect and not have anybody, not disappoint anybody because of his upbringing that we see from his family that we get into in Blood Promise, right? They both have the same things that are integral to their parts and to who they are. Mm-hmm. Right? But because Adrian seems more damaged, we feel bad for him. Mm-hmm. But Dimitri is just as damaged because he's 24, right? In the world of the Guardians, but he's still expected to be this like crucial pedestal within the community, right? I'm 25. Once again, not saying that the boundary should not exist, mm-hmm. right? But like, I'm 25, been teaching for 3 years, right? And it's the same issue that I run into of, man, like I'm still figuring things out, mm-hmm. you know? And like, he's still figuring things out and should almost be given the same grace we're giving Adrian. Because I do think Adrian and Dimitri end goal want the same thing. They both want to be with Rose. Mm-hmm. And it's always interesting because it's not just you. It's literally throughout the fandom, throughout the conversations. It's the same thing of, I would rather Adrian and all of these things. And it's interesting to me because ultimately, like, black and white, they're still both wrong because she's still...
But they're not the same age. If anything, Adrian is closer mm-hmm. to Rose in the sense that, you know, high schoolers, graduating, life after all mm-hmm. of that. Like, they're not the same age. If they were both 24, absolutely 100% we need to hold them to the same mm-hmm. standard. But they're not. And the amount of growing you do between the ages of 20, 21 and 25 and 26, like, it's a big difference. Mm-hmm. We can't hold Adrian to the same expectation because he's not there yet. Whereas, like, 24, 25-year-old Dimitri is. Like, is he still growing? Yes. Is he still, like, young compared to the rest of the Guardians? Yes. But that 3 years of growth that he has that Adrian doesn't have yet, like, we can't compare the two. Who I was at 2021 is not who I was at 24, 25.
Yeah, I guess it's because in Blood Promise, which not getting super deep into it because that's in the next episode, but I guess because we see the community in which he was grown up in.
Yes.
It takes away a lot of the blame that I would normally feel towards Dimitri in terms of why he ended up the way that he did. We can break that down more in the next one because we can't really break that down without breaking down the book. Right. But on that note, listeners, we have strong feelings. Catch those in the next episode because we're about to hit stop recording and immediately walk into the other one. She's putting her hair up, so I might get jumped. But this has been another episode of Margin Mavens. We appreciate each and every single one of you. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And we will see you in the next episode.